Welcome to Verge Electrify. I'm Sarah Golden. In 1962, a television show debuted that envisioned life in the space age. Its name? The Jetsons. The show takes place in 2062 and follows 40-year-old George Jetson and his family. That means that George Jetson was born in 2022. To be precise, according to Jetson's lore, he was born in July 2022. Today, it's George Jetson's birthday. We are entering the era of the Jetsons. Despite its short run, Jetsons lives on in our cultural imagination. It captured a perfect retro-futuristic ideal, a time when we would have flying cars and robot maids and domestic efficiency, when everything would be automated and there would be nothing to do but live a life of leisure.
Boy, these 3-hour days are killing me.
All within an old-fashioned, often problematic ideal of a retrograde family unit. As we enter the Jetsons era, I'm more aware than ever that the choices we make today will decide the quality of that future. We hold the power to decide the shape of climate change, who will benefit, who will thrive. And I don't mean we in this generic sense, I mean literally us, this community. Verge Electrify is anchored in an optimistic idea that it is possible to address climate change profitably and fairly. All we have to do is move fast. There are many non-negotiable things we need to do to address climate change. An item high on that list? Electrify everything. The good news? Many of the technologies of the future are already here today. Case in point, you are currently at a conference with thousands of your peers from the comfort of your own office or home. Who would have ever thought that that would be possible just a few decades ago? When it comes to electrifying everything, the technological breakthroughs are just as impressive. We know how to decarbonize the economy, and we have access to the tools to get us there. Tools that are more efficient and affordable and better than we ever could have dreamed. Now the trick is to scale them, deploy them, commercialize them. That requires energy users to make all electric decisions starting now, including electrifying transportation, industry, buildings. These new technologies aren't a one-to-one replacement for what we have today. Often, they're better. They could save you money. They could give you a competitive advantage. They could avert climate chaos. Yet, they are different. And if you're running a company, different can be scary. It could initially slow down operations. It could initially cost money. It could be dangerous to try something new. But the thing is, not acting is more dangerous. Not acting is foregoing our say in the future we want to create. So let's bring this down to earth. When I talk to people working towards climate goals, I hear a familiar refrain. Folks understand the importance of electrification, but how can they actually do it? Where should they start? How do they get buy-in from stakeholders? How do they pay for upgrades? Those questions help shape the Electrify program. We're not here to convince you to electrify, though some of our keynotes would likely fit that purpose. We're here to help you take the next steps on your decarbonization journey. So, here's what you can expect. In today's keynotes, we're going to go through the 3 sectors that must electrify to reach deep decarbonization: buildings, industry, and transport. We have top analysts and trailblazers from each sector helping make sense of where we are and where we're headed. You'll hear from Kevin Hagen of Iron Mountain, Emily Kirsch and Patti Poppe in Conversation, and Rebecca Dell from ClimateWorks. Then, we've curated 18 sessions diving into topics, case studies, barriers, and opportunities shaping the path to electrification. This is your opportunity to connect with early movers looking to transform operations and supply chains. To be clear, no one has done enough yet. But these are the brave souls who are out front trying and blazing the trail we need. We'll end the program tomorrow with another hour of keynotes. These talks are designed to bring together the many ideas and concepts we've discussed. We have Saul Griffith on the state of electrification, Jesse Jenkins on the grid of the future, U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich on electrification for peace, and Jigar Shah on why procurements matter. So, without further ado, let's get to the program. First, I want to welcome a new face to the GreenBiz stage. Vartan Badalian is GreenBiz's transport analyst and the mastermind behind our transportation program at Electrify. I challenged him to give us a 90-second, high-voltage transmission on where we are on the road to electrifying transportation.
Thank you, Sarah. We got 90 seconds, so let's break it down. Transport is the leading source of emissions around the world. In the US, transport accounts for 29% of total GHG emissions, the most of any industry. So, how do we draw down these emissions? Well, first, let's start by electrifying everything, and I mean everything. Light-duty vehicles like passenger cars and trucks represent the largest chunk of transport sector emissions in the US, amounting to roughly 57% of total transport emissions. They also represent the most mature market right now, with new EVs being announced regularly. Medium and heavy-duty vehicles represent the second largest chunk of emissions in the US, coming in at roughly 26% of total transport emissions. While this area is hard to electrify given vehicle weight and payload, that isn't stopping the industry. And lastly, the shipping and aviation industries collectively account for 10% of transport sector emissions and represent one of the more difficult areas to decarbonize. However, early movement in the space is promising, with solutions being tested and deployed. The next 8 years are key to reaching net zero goals, and we must reduce GHG emissions globally by half in order to meet net zero by 2050. To tee up the transport track, let's turn now to one company, Iron Mountain, and how they're approaching electrifying their fleet in London.
Excited to be here at Coady today. Our London operations have been the focus of our electric vehicle program for some time. And now rolling out the first real fleet of electric vehicles is quite a great day for our operations here. And really, if we're doing it right, our operations worldwide.
As many of you know who live in this area, London is a very congested area, but it is our largest operation for Iron Mountain across the whole region. And we're here all about wanting to serve our customers and have a very positive impact on the environment.
We wouldn't survive as a company without transportation. It's that direct kind of interaction with the customer. So the drivers have to be ambassadors for the company.
I mean, you come back, you plug it in, you go home. You ain't got to worry about checking all your water and all things like that. So yeah, it should be a lot easier, and it's going to be good for the environment.
You gotta think of the big picture. So here in the UK, we achieved our RE100 100% renewable energy goal a couple of years ago. In addition, here in Coady, we operate this facility with a solar array on the roof. And now we've installed commercial charging infrastructure with our partner NLX, all set for our fleet electrification.
When you're talking about electrifying the fleet, you need many different partners to come in place. For a company with this size and working in multiple different countries, they need someone that they can rely on and depend on.
Today is our first proof point for the program. So what's happening today is just step one of this journey. And next we're going to be looking at Latin America, we're looking at APAC, and we're looking at different locations to expand and really grow this program.
Companies like Iron Mountain are showing other companies that this is possible and at the kind of cutting edge of companies who are kind of leading the way as we transition to a zero emission transport system.
I thought I would like to toast to a safe and successful electric vehicle journey for Iron Mountain and for all companies around the world. Cheers.
I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Sandra Rowling. I'm Director of Transport at the Climate Group. And one of the big projects I have the pleasure of leading as part of that is something called EV100, which brings together international companies that make commitments to go electric. And I'm very pleased to be here with Kevin Hagen, who's Vice President of Environmental, Social and Government Strategy at Iron Mountain, who's one of those companies who have already gotten onto that journey and made the commitment. And we've already seen this very exciting video to show some of the early moments of bringing this commitment to life as well. So very excited to be here today to hear a little bit more about what it means to go electric in your fleet in very practical terms. So welcome, Kevin, and thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Hey, thanks, Sandra. Great to be here. Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. So let's start with, the basics. And we've already seen a few impressions, but what does this commitment overall mean for Iron Mountain, and why did you make that choice?
Well, it's kind of a big step for us. The biggest part of our remaining carbon emissions is from vehicles. That's only because we've spent quite a few years working on our electricity footprint, which dwarfed all other aspects of our greenhouse gas footprint. But now that we've had a bit of success in finding renewable energy solutions across the world, especially in our data center business that now operates on 100% renewables, we've been able to achieve a pretty high level of renewable penetration for our electricity footprint. And that kind of paves the way to, well, electrify everything, part of our next greenhouse gas piece. So the fleet footprint has been the next thing up. And we've been thinking about it a lot, been working on it quite a bit in the preparation, and now starting to see some results as we roll it out. Appreciate showing the video. Looks like everything's going great, doesn't it?
Yes, that's why we have you here today, to find out, maybe some of those darker secrets behind all the big successes. I know that obviously it's a very new journey. It's it's not just buying a different kind of vehicle and then you're done, I imagine. So tell us a little bit about your experiences. What have you learned along the way? What are maybe some of the things that have also surprised you as you got going? And what are maybe some of the things that others that are considering this type of journey might be learning from?
So we're not UPS and we're not FedEx. We don't have hundreds of thousands of vehicles, but we do have a substantial fleet. I think we look a lot like a lot of companies of our scale. We have around 5,000 vehicles worldwide, in about 60 different countries. And it varies from company cars in Europe, especially, to vans and fleet delivery all over Latin America and Europe, and US, to, in the US, a lot more larger scale vehicles, especially class 6 box trucks. So with all that, there's a wide variety of vehicles across the whole world. What I think we're seeing is that there was a lot we didn't know until we got the data. Right? So I like to joke with friends, the data shall set you free. So we're moving from, this emotion, and it's exactly the same thing that happened to us in electricity. Right? We moved from, we should do something, to let's get the data and understand where we really are, what's behind the scenes here. And that really led us to some chance of making a difference. I think what we really learned is it's a little more daunting than we thought. It's kind of a big deal. And getting it organized and getting it moving and getting the data was actually a lot of the hard part.
Makes sense. Obviously, I guess it helps to be someone who deals with data to a certain extent to start with, to appreciate the value of it. But what are some of the things that you sort of take it from the data? What are maybe some of the things that have surprised you that were a bit different than you would have expected from the outset?
That it's different in different countries. The circumstances are different all over, especially from North American eyes. The different landscape in different places was important. So, for example, having a conversation with our leadership team in the US about fleet electrification wasn't obvious yet at that time. This was a couple of years ago, when we said, hey, by the way, did you know 24 cities in Europe are banning diesel vehicles over the next decade? And so if we don't figure out EVs now, we can't serve customers then. Like, oh, well, that changes things. We probably need that information so we can use those opportunities to learn fast. And the other thing we learned from this, from the homework in the front end, was different regulatory environments, different incentive programs, tax structures. It's so varied in different places. What we recognized was, if we do the homework better, we can find places that already are in the money, if you will. Places where the total cost of ownership, and in fact, in some cases, the first cost of procurement for EVs for us is actually already making money versus status quo. So that was an eye opener. I'm like, wait, this makes money now? And so identifying those locations really made it a lot easier to get on board and move from sort of pilots and testers to let's roll this out in seriously in a way that makes sense. So that's where the London program came from. That really is a reflection of our more big picture total cost of ownership analysis that really opened our eyes.
Great. Yeah, I think that's really good to hear, because let's face it, for businesses, money is always an important piece. And, how are you possibly going to finance this? I think is one of the questions that's coming to mind to most of the decision makers that you would bring such a story to. So what else did you need in order to bring the company on board? Who else did you involve? And, what are the different stakeholder groups that you need, and what does it take to convince them?
I think the first key to this was the recognition and, taking a page out of help from our collaboration partners. You can't leave the fleet folks alone to try to just do this by themselves. This is a technology disruption, not a replacement of a vehicle. And in the process, that meant a different mentality about implementation. So pulling together folks from finance, operations, facilities management, real estate, procurement, of course, even marketing, right? So pulling people, we would never got that film if the marketing folks hadn't been in the room, right? So I think the opportunity to pull people together to look at things differently was really important. You can't get there without the facilities team. We need chargers, and we need to dig up the parking lot, right? That's not popular. So you better have the whole picture together. Additionally, what we found was that the total cost of ownership model was really important to think about. Leaving folks to figure out, first cost least advantage is, hard task. So figuring out, though, that the total cost on a, let's say, 5-year basis was actually positive in a lot of places already was kind of key. As I like to joke with the CFO, once we figure out how to make money at it, nobody stops us. So it was kind of a shift of thinking, but it was harder. So, for example, little things about making sure this is coordinated. A good example, the fleet folks think it's free fuel, right? Because diesel has been in the calculation of what it costs to do operations. Electricity is managed in an entirely different budget, in an entirely different part of the business, a different silo, if you will. So to the facilities management team, this looks like bad news. We're increasing load where they've been incented to put in LEDs and reduce load for years, right? So now all of a sudden we're increasing load, probably at an inconvenient time of day. And if we do it wrong, we can spike a new peak demand and end up charging ourselves even more. But if we don't do the electric, we're stuck back in, not making progress. So getting those folks all to talk and putting it on paper so that the budgets get organized and we don't fool ourselves one way or the other, and we don't create unnecessary objections in the organization. That was all really important to put all the players together to get a better view.
Thanks, Kevin. I think it's quite an important point that you're making there about electric vehicles not just being a one-on-one replacement for the internal combustion engine vehicles, and just needing a different way of thinking about things and setting things up. So can you talk a little bit more about what exactly is different? What are the things that you need to think about differently from ICE vehicles?
This is one of the eye-opening moments, I think. We focus a lot on trying to make EVs do what diesels do. And the conversation tends to be, they don't do X, Y, or Z. This is where range anxiety or other things come from, right? And often it's whether or not the diesel did it ever. But it's the perception that we're not going to do that. I think a turning point moment has come for us when we started to think the opposite direction. What do electric vehicles do that diesel vehicles can't? And as soon as that clicked, it was like, oh my goodness. The joke I make is that it's like when I had a flip phone and people showed me an iPhone or smartphone, I went, oh, but it doesn't fold. Well, yeah, it's the internet in your palm and it's going to change your life, right? But no, it doesn't fold, right? So I pretty much figured out later that folding wasn't so important to me as all the other things that it could do that I never imagined. So I think that's what's really happening in the electric vehicle space. As we switch to it doesn't make noise, the driver in that video said, I don't have to check the water, I don't have to check the oil. All of a sudden, things got easier. And then when we realized that drivers actually love them, it's actually now a perk to get to drive the EVs because drivers really like it. All of a sudden, everything changed. And I think that when we make that moment to switch gears to, all the things that EVs do to open doors for us that we couldn't have done before, it really changes the game.
Thanks. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. As a last question, just to ask you, what's next on your horizon? What are the things that you feel like, okay, this is something that still needs work? And where do you see some opportunities to maybe do that together with others as well? Maybe also as an invitation to those listening in today to think about where the opportunities for co-creation are.
Working together with others is crucial to making progress. Folks have joked sustainability is a team sport, but we really experience that. Whether it's other corporations and companies, or whether it's our NGO partners like the Climate Group and the EV100 program, continuing the track record we've had from RE100 successes, being able to coordinate with others is really important. I joke, if you don't tell people what you're doing, how can they help you? So the idea of being able to be connected, we're learning fast from others. Why make the same mistakes, right? So we can learn fast from others, and the collaboration platform that the Climate Group provides, for example, it really gives us the permission and the opportunity to coordinate with competitors, with peers, with companies maybe we would never have met before, to be able to put the thing together in a way that gets a bigger bang. We get faster and further when we go together.
Thanks. I think that's great final words, and to the point of, you need to tell others what you're doing. Hopefully that's also inspiration for everyone being part of Virtual Electrify today. It's obviously all about exchanging and sharing, getting people connected. So thanks a lot again, Kevin Hagen, for joining us today, and for everyone who's listening in. And I'll hand back to Sarah.
Electrifying everything opens new potential. It's an opportunity to rethink the world we live in, to create something that's usable and beautiful, something that's new. Few places capture that spirit better than Manhattan. This is a city that is built on a city that is built on an island, and it is constantly reimagining and reinventing itself. I am in a place that is emblematic of that. This is Highland Park. It is a public park that is elevated and goes through the meatpacking district. In the mid-1800s, this was a freight line. And about 20, 30 years ago, the city began the process of turning it into a beautiful, usable, human-centric park. And this is emblematic of what we need to do for the entire built environment. Electrifying everything isn't just about taking out old, dirty appliances and slapping in new, clean ones. It's an opportunity to ensure that our buildings are created in a way that is based around people and also is future-proofed, because we can't address climate change if we don't decarbonize buildings. And likewise, humans can't weather an uncertain climate future if we don't have resilient buildings. So, where are we on the path to electrifying buildings? To answer that, I'm going to turn it over to Isaac Knipfing, GreenBiz's building analyst.
Here's the problem. 1/10 of total US carbon emissions come from burning fossil fuels for heating and cooking in homes and businesses. Natural gas usage indoors is linked to hundreds of thousands of cancer deaths and respiratory health problems each year in the US. Here's the good news. We are up for the challenge of electrification. The technologies exist. Electric heat pumps are 300% more efficient than their gas-powered alternatives and work in extreme climates. It will save energy customers money. Electrified buildings have, on average, 20 to 70% lower utility bills. It creates jobs. For every $1 million invested in electrifying buildings, 30 jobs in manufacturing and construction will be created. It improves public health. kitchens with all-electric appliances emit 50% less fine particles compared to gas kitchens. But just because it is possible doesn't mean it will be easy. Coming up, we have content covering two of the major barriers to rapid electrification. First up, equity. Ensuring all communities have access to and benefit from electrification will be central to meeting climate goals. Next, we have a conversation with PG&E's Poppe on how California's largest utility is prepping for this. Perhaps the hardest part for folks going all electric is overcoming the emotional attachment to gas stoves and the misconception that gas provides superior cooking. Electric induction cooking is changing all that, but it's still a process to get chefs on board. We're going to take a look at Microsoft's new all-electric kitchen and how they overcame these hurdles.
I'm Emily Kirsch, founder and CEO of Powerhouse and managing partner of Powerhouse Ventures. If we are going to decarbonize equitably, it's going to require intentionality. And today, solutions to decarbonize and electrify our built environment are often inaccessible to underserved communities. But there are utility leaders that are bringing that intentionality to scale electrification, like Patti Poppe, CEO of PG&E. Patti, welcome to the Electrify virtual stage.
Thank you, Emily. So happy to be with you.
Happy to have you. So I wanted to start by just contextualizing the role of equity in electrification. And so, Patti, what role does equity and electrification play in achieving our climate goals?
Well, I think they go hand in hand. In fact, I'd say over the last 100 years, perhaps they haven't. And some of our most vulnerable citizens live in areas with the greatest density of pollution and don't necessarily have the safest and cleanest energy sources being delivered to them. And so I think it's really important as we move forward that we don't let that happen again. The energy industry is in a major transformation, and this is our opportunity to transform, make our, as we decarbonize the economy and utilize electrification as a key enabler to do that, we have to make sure we don't leave anyone behind.
100% agreed. And I know this work is hard. There are all kinds of challenges, but there are also solutions. What are some of the challenges, the structural challenges in enabling equitable access to electric homes in particular?
I think there's two things. I am excited about some of the opportunities, so I look forward to getting to that part. But I'll share some of the challenges, particularly as we transition homes from natural gas to electricity. During that transition time, there's a real risk that the customers who transition first will have the benefits of that electrification and leave others paying for the infrastructure cost of those remaining delivering the assets that deliver natural gas. So, for example, in some of the cities that have established, whether it's new construction electrification building codes or in cases where they've banned natural gas, they sometimes leave an exception for home cooking, for example, or because there's a lot of resistance. I think it's the hardest thing for people to imagine switching. And in those cases, that would mean we would still have a natural gas main, we'd still have service lines, we'd still have compressor stations just to fuel those stovetops, if you will. And so it's really important that as we transition, we do it in a very intentional way. And we have a lot of plans at PG&E to really do strategic electrification in lieu of natural gas so it can be a whole-scale change. And we can really make sure that people aren't left then carrying a much greater burden for the remaining assets in the system as the transition occurs.
Makes a ton of sense. And you mentioned the solutions. Tell me more about some of those solutions that PG&E is enabling for your customers.
Well, one of the things that really surprises people when we talk about electrification, and when I think about electrification, I think of electrification of buildings and transportation. And when we look at and we do our forecasts on the household spend on electricity, natural gas, and gasoline, as customers become EV drivers, their actual household energy expense goes down. And so what excites me about that is that means that we can enable people to actually free up their household wallet to spend on other things, important things, groceries, medicine, other aspects of a household expenditure, in lieu of spending it on that triple stack of energy, gasoline, natural gas, and electricity. So we're pretty excited about that, especially as we talk about the role that electric vehicles will play in strengthening the grid, which I'd be happy to talk about more.
Please do.
One of the things that people ask me all the time about electric vehicles is the grid ready? And will we have enough energy? And I think there's some important local questions to be answered about that, making sure we have the transformer and the circuits prepared for density of electric vehicles. But one of the things people don't realize is that those electric vehicles can serve as both a source of energy as much as a draw on energy. Today, in my service area in Northern and Central California, we have 6,600 megawatts of capacity driving around our roads today. people might not know what 6,600 megawatts is, but it is 3 Diablo Canyon power plants of capacity today, not in the future, today, driving around our roads. And if we can enable those vehicles to provide a power back to the grid on those peak times, I see those vehicles then as a grid resource. So customers who might otherwise not be able to afford an electric vehicle, perhaps we incentivize that electric vehicle because it's really a mini power plant. And when that customer agrees to enable that vehicle to dispatch to the grid 5 days a year, they get access to electric transportation that cleans their air, allows them to have the participation in the electrification movement, lower their household energy expense. I see it as a pathway to equitable, clean energy. And that makes us really excited at PG&E.
One of the best descriptions of EVs that I ever heard was they're just batteries on wheels. So I think that
for
reflects
sure,
what you said.
For sure. And I don't think people realize, I don't think we've really tapped the full potential of EVs in that way. And in fact, we made some important announcements this year with Ford and GM, enabling their bidirectional charging vehicles to feed homes and grids, both as a resilience play when we have to interrupt power to keep people safe during wildfire season, and as this peak summer resource. So the first 5 Ford Lightnings are going to plug into the PG&E grid, and we're pretty excited about that.
Interestingly, too, it's actually the cheapest way to get home storage is through an F-150 or another car that can serve as storage. So it's a fun way to build that in a way that it might not otherwise be possible.
Yeah, an off-lease Chevy Bolt, for example, the General Motors product, they've been on the roads for several years, so now they're coming off lease. They cost about $12,000. That off-lease Chevy Bolt is the equivalent of 6 Tesla Powerwalls.
Exactly.
6, it can power a home for 3 to 5 days.
Exactly.
That's pretty exciting.
Agreed. So what you're speaking to is essentially a transformational shift in our energy and mobility systems. And to that point, natural gas at this point and the infrastructure to enable the delivery of gas is everywhere. And so as more homes and buildings are electrified, how does a utility like PG&E strategically transition without negatively impacting communities that can't afford to be those early movers that you were speaking to earlier?
Yeah, I would say that PG&E in particular is uniquely positioned because we're a dual fuel utility. We both deliver natural gas and electricity, and our service areas overlap almost 100%. That gives us sort of a more agnostic point of view about how people want their energy delivered. I feel grateful that we get to be very much customer obsessed on how customers want energy, we can deliver it. And we've already seen many cases. In fact, we have 84 homes that we have already transitioned from gas to electricity. And we do those in very specific cases. And in fact, there was a case in Monterey where there was a gas project planned. And when we looked at the gas project, which was going to cost about $1.2 million to replace the service in the main to one home, we realized that if we just electrified that home, it would cost dramatically less. So we saved $1 million by not replacing the main and the service and instead electrifying that home. And so more and more, we have an integrated energy system as a strategy for PG&E, not a gas strategy, not an electric strategy, but an energy system strategy. And we're uniquely positioned then to really find the best, cleanest, most reliable, most resilient, lowest cost solution for customers and not have to feel compelled to hang on and protect our business model.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of underserved communities, you're saying in many cases, at least for new build, it's actually cheaper to just not build the gas lines in the first place.
Absolutely. In fact, my husband was involved in a project. It was a residential project, multi-family living. And it was a really interesting project because at first glance, the developer and the builder knew that the lowest cost way to build the project was electric only. They didn't have to invest in the gas infrastructure, so that was good. But at first, they might not have been incentivized properly to make it the most efficient electric build. And so when we, the utility, started working with this project team, we helped them realize that insulation was really important, that smart thermostats were important. We convinced them to put solar on the roof. So this project realized that it was a selling feature then for future residents, that they would have a better opportunity to have full utilization of these rental units because they were green, energy efficient, but that was not their first thought.
It's great to see your leadership at PG&E and how seriously you're taking this transition, ensuring that it is an equitable one as we move to decarbonized and electrified systems, including our built environment. So it's great to hear about everything that you're doing. Before we close, I do have to ask, Patti, if you were going to be an animal, what animal would you be and why?
Oh, well, I long ago learned I'm very much like a beaver, a busy beaver. I work hard. I care a lot. I have a lot of energy and want to make sure that we build things that last and build things that matter. And I definitely get to do that with my coworkers at PG&E. We've taken a stand that we are delivering for our hometowns, serving our planet, and leading with love. And I can't think of a better way to do that than by participating and helping be a critical element of the decarbonization of our economy and delivering safe and reliable and affordable energy for all of our customers.
So well said. I am so happy to hear that the leader of a utility as big as PG&E is leading with love, and that's part of something that you've built into your team culture. I think we need more of that. So I'm so happy that you shared that, and I'm really grateful for your leadership. And thanks for joining me on the Electrify stage.
Thanks so much for having me. I was so happy to be with everyone today. Hope you have a great conference.
We're excited to open One Astera because it really embodies a lot of the sustainability commitments that we have within our workplace. One of the key elements of One Astera was also a commitment to electrify the building. So as we know from a carbon negative by 2030 perspective, we have to eliminate carbon from how we design and operate our buildings. That meant electrifying our kitchens.
There are several key elements that make One Astera Food Hall truly one of a kind. The first being the commitment to sustainability. The food hall really represents our first completely all-electric, carbon-free cooking space on site. We have over 13,000 square feet of food service space at Astera that is completely induction and electric equipment. This was a huge pivot for our teams. Historically, we've had over 75% of our equipment in food service spaces on site that were gas generated. And it really lent to the flavor authenticity of the food too. How do we continue to cook in historical ways that embody and pay homage to the history and the nuance of all of these global food flavors, but do so while embracing new sustainable ways of cooking? And it was also a challenge because the equipment that we needed didn't exist yet at a commercial scale.
One of the most challenging parts about sustainability is you set audacious goals like carbon negative, water positive, and zero waste. And often that leaves us wondering, how does that tactically work within a kitchen? How does that tactically work within a building mechanical system? And so it's been really fun to partner on how we take some of these really ambitious goals and translate them in a way that not only transforms our cafeterias and the way that our employees experience dining at Microsoft, but also the broader industry, and demonstrating this is something that can be done and this is something that is necessary as we transition to a carbon-free future.
I think it can be very intimidating to think, how can I partner with sustainability and how can I integrate that change into what I oversee for Microsoft? And the path forward for us was one step at a time, understanding what we needed to do, what needed to change, where were the challenging points and where was the low-hanging fruit. And little by little, we were able to get there and make a difference that is truly going to set a new standard for delicious and sustainable food at Microsoft.
The transition to a clean energy future gives us a huge opportunity to mitigate the inequitable impacts of our current fossil fuel system, but it isn't a given. Burning coal, oil, and gas in power plants in people's homes for cooking and heating produces health-damaging air pollutants, and we've seen again and again that low-income communities and communities of color face the heaviest pollution burdens. Low-income households also pay nearly 9% of their income on average on energy costs, according to the Department of Energy. We analyzed residential building decarbonization and found that systemically investing in electrification and weatherization for low-income households can reduce these energy cost burdens and indoor air pollution and save billions of dollars compared to alleviating energy cost burdens with bill assistance payments. And leaving behind these households also risks saddling them with rising gas infrastructure costs as wealthier homes electrify in the coming decades. We know we are eventually going to have to weatherize and electrify nearly every building to decarbonize our economy. So let's get impacted communities at the table up front to help design policy and reduce energy cost burdens and pollution burdens as the first step towards building decarbonization. I'm Dr. Elena Krieger. I'm the Director of Research at Physician Scientists and Engineers for Healthy Energy, and this is my big little talk.
Combining insights around human behaviours with tech and automation can help us prevent the overburdening of the grid, a scenario that we have to prepare for in an electrified future. Research Unit's Centre for Net Zero recently released analysis showing how consumers currently interact with electric vehicles and the potential to shift their charging patterns using intelligent tariffs. We showed how electric vehicle owners are currently switching their energy use to periods outside of grid peaks through automation, using smart algorithms to control when the vehicle charges. Charging an EV should be like charging a mobile phone overnight. People don't mind when their phone charges, so long as it's ready to use when they wake up. With EV charging taking place automatically in the background, people can start their day confident that their car is ready to drive and that they're participating in a greener energy system. My name's Lucy Yu, CEO of Centre for Net Zero, and this is my big little talk.
Coffee is the most consumed beverage in the world after water, and yet coffee roasters all run on natural gas. Roasting alone makes up 15% of coffee's total carbon footprint. When you consider that in the US, 650 million cups of coffee were consumed today, those emissions are really adding up. As long as the world's roasters run on gas, the coffee industry cannot be sustainable. To solve the problem of gas roasting, we invented the world's first all-electric ventless coffee roaster. At the size of a fridge, the Bellwether roaster fits almost anywhere. No gas lines, no ventilation, and therefore a very easy installation. That means that any cafe can roast coffee right on site, further reducing carbon by cutting down on waste, packaging, and critical transportation miles for roasted coffee. The Bellwether is so efficient that even in areas where electricity comes from burning coal, roasting electric is still cleaner than roasting on gas. Electric roasting is better for the environment, retailers, and farmers. By moving away from gas roasting, we can create a sustainable future for your morning habit. My name is Arno Holschuh, Chief Coffee Officer of Bellwether Coffee, and this is my big little talk.
Okay, the last sector we must electrify is a tricky one: industry. While the electrification of transportation is underway and electrifying buildings has a clear path forward, industry still has gaps. Big, dirty, carbon-emitting gaps. In truth, decarbonizing industry isn't just about electrification. It's about transforming how we make the materials that build the world we live in. And that's a big task, but a necessary task. So I turned to my favorite industrial decarbonization expert to put the problem in context. Rebecca Dell directs the industry program for the ClimateWorks Foundation. And she's smart on this. She's the type of person who won't hesitate to stop in the middle of the conversation to correct you when you say smelt and you meant forge. And she's passionate about solutions and realistic about where we are and what's possible. It's not always pretty, but the first step of getting where we're going is knowing where we are.
Hi, my name's Rebecca Dell. I'm the Program Director for the Industry Program at the ClimateWorks Foundation. This is the largest steel mill in North America, in East Chicago, Indiana, on the shores of Lake Michigan. It can produce 50 pounds of steel per year for every person in the United States. That probably sounds like a lot, but actually, around the world, we produce more than 10 times that per person. And we use it to make everything. Because steel is great. It's strong, it's stiff, it's formable, it's durable. It has a variety of useful both thermal and electrical properties. It's widely available, and it's cheap. We're going to come back to that last point. But unfortunately, every year, this mill is also producing 2 billion pounds of CO2, the gas most responsible for our climate crisis. They're actually making about twice as much CO2 as steel, just like every other traditional steel mill in the world. And that's why this chart looks the way it does. These are all the climate-changing emissions from the last 30 years, split out into major sectors. The bright wedges at the top are direct emissions from industry. The paler wedge underneath is emissions from generating all the electricity that's used by industry. Between the two, the industrial sector is responsible for 38%, or comfortably more than a third, of all global emissions. And notice how the slope at the top of the green wedge is considerably steeper than the slope at the bottom of it. That's because industrial emissions are rising at twice the rate of overall climate-changing emissions. So this is an enormous problem, getting worse very quickly. We're definitely talking about steel mills, but it turns out that from a climate perspective, we're talking about surprisingly not much else. After steel, the biggest emitters are cement and chemicals, mostly fertilizer and plastics. Those three generate 2/3 of direct CO2 emissions from industry. Aluminum and paper are a distant 4th and 5th. Everything else, mining, construction, manufacturing, food processing, waste processing, all together generate only 1/4 of industrial emissions. So mostly what we're talking about when we talk about industry and climate is metal, building materials, paper, fertilizer, and plastics. The basic materials of our lives and our economy. So you're probably thinking, phew, I don't work in the steel industry, so I'm off the hook. Unfortunately not. These emissions are hiding in your supply chains. If you sell cars, their steel is a major source of emissions. If you work in the construction industry, you're buying cement and concrete. And these supply chain emissions, sometimes called Scope 3 emissions, can be remarkably large. A few years back, Apple did a comprehensive accounting of all the greenhouse gases emitted to make their products. This included the direct emissions from their own facilities, the emissions from generating electricity for their offices and data centers, from the airplanes and trucks that move their products, from the factories that manufacture their products and components, all the way to the raw materials. What they found was that the single largest source, the biggest line item in their emissions budget, was from making the aluminum for the housings of their computers and tablets. In fact, just making the aluminum was responsible for more than 1/4 of all the emissions everywhere in their supply chain. After all, while making steel might emit 2 tons of CO2 for every ton of steel, making aluminum can emit more than 20 tons of CO2 for every ton of aluminum. Once they knew this, they could take action. They started refining the design of their products to make them easier to recycle. They preferentially purchased aluminum from suppliers that used clean energy and so had lower emissions. They invested in a research joint venture to develop a new and innovative process to make aluminum without all the greenhouse gas emissions. They became a driver of change in the aluminum industry. None of this would have been possible if they hadn't first done the work of finding the emissions in their supply chains. So this is where you come in. You need to do the same thing. Find all the major sources of emissions that your firm and your business activities are responsible for, so you can make a plan to reduce and then eliminate them. What you find will depend on what you do, but for many businesses, you should expect that, like Apple, making the basic materials that go into your products will be a big portion of what you find. Once you know what you're dealing with, you have a lot of options. First, maybe you can just use less of whatever materials you're currently using. While we all know the importance of energy efficiency, most businesses haven't put much thought into material efficiency. The bad news is, that means you're probably wasting materials. The good news is, that means there are probably some easy opportunities to reduce your material use without having to try too hard. Making products last longer, either by making them more durable or making them easier to repair or upgrade, is a great way to improve material efficiency. Next, maybe you can substitute a material with lower greenhouse gas emissions. This could be a recycled version of the original material or something completely different. For example, maybe you could use engineered wood instead of steel in a building. Finally, maybe the most important thing you can do is to work with your vendors and suppliers to help them reduce their emissions. This can start with practical information sharing, but it shouldn't stop there. You're going to have to work with them to unlock the innovative solutions that will get us to net zero. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, why is this my problem? The companies making these materials should be responsible for figuring out how to do it without all the emissions. But the simple truth is, they can't do it without you. If no one wants to buy climate-safe materials, no one is going to make them. And you can afford it. Remember what I said about steel being cheap? That's true of all these materials. When Apple discovered that aluminum was the biggest driver of their climate impact, they were spending less than $1 per laptop on it. The additional cost of green materials is a rounding error on the cost of most finished products, even if there are steep transition costs for the materials industries themselves. The industries that drive climate damage need partnership from their customers and supply chains if they are going to make the switch. That partnership means sharing information, sharing risk, developing solutions together, committing in advance to purchasing clean materials, and advocating together for public policies that will make our low carbon transition possible. And all of that is only fair, because while not many of us buy raw steel or trucks full of ethylene, we all benefit from products made out of them, and we all need a way to make them without baking the climate. So ask yourself, what's hiding in your supply chain?
I'm in West Oakland, a concentrated spot for industrial activity. To one side of me is the MacArthur Maze, where 250,000 cars pass every single day. And to the other side of me is the Port of Oakland, the 10th largest port in the nation. And behind me are industrial facilities. And this place has the air pollution to prove it. Now, I live in Oakland, and I love Oakland. And I also know Oakland has room for growth, just like everywhere else. This seemed a fitting location to close out today's keynotes. So often when we talk about change, we focus on the growing pains, not all the ways we could make life better. Before we get to the breakouts, I want to drive home one point we've made a few times throughout the last hour. The technologies we need to electrify and decarbonize exist today. Researchers find we can get to 90% to our net zero goals through deploying what we already have. To showcase these new, shiny, futuristic technologies, we created a video using a handful of examples and put together in a supercut. The song in the video was made specifically for Electrify by Blue Dot Sessions, and it takes clips from all of these old movies that make reference to electricity and turns it into a jam. Because once you start noticing how electricity inspires creativity, you notice it everywhere.
Now, charge the lightning field.
This storm will be magnificent. It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Doesn't it give you kind of a shudder of electricity through you to be in the same room with me?
Chewie, take the professor in the back and plug him into the hyperdrive.
That is your 5,000 volts.
You can smell the charge.
Full power!
It's Electrify!
All the electrical secrets of heaven.
More power!